Before we begin, please bear in mind that the subject of authoring love is a vast area of exploration, and we're just at the beginning of that exploration. In keeping with the subject matter of this series, the following video will include provocative imagery and language. The love scene at the end of this video is one style of a love scene amongst many. And with regards to that love scene, I've kept it fairly gentle as opposed to extreme when it comes to writing explicitly. If you haven't watched it already, I highly recommend that you watch the first video in this series, Authoring Love Part 1, Beyond the Traditional Muse, as it forms the foundation for this video. In that previous video, I stated that many writers are inspired by a muse when it comes to creating love scenes and love stories. The muse could be someone they know, a lover, a friend, a spouse. The muse could be a limerent object, a person with whom they're obsessed but in all likelihood will never have. The muse could be a character from a beloved book or film. The muse could be a ghost or a phantom who haunts their space and their thinking. The muse could be a deity, a spiritual divine being. But in the previous video, I proposed that we expand our thinking beyond these traditional muses that fit into the modern concept of musehood. I suggested that if a writer was writing in a flow state, they'd be deeply inspired by other inspirational entities. I proposed setting as muse, image as muse, and language itself as muse. Because setting, image, and language, for writers passionate about their art, are, in and of themselves, living, growing sources of inspiration. In part 1 of this series, I gave you a list of words inspired by the setting of the cathedral. And then, I gave you a list of words evoked by the image of the lovers, telling you that I was going to exchange the words. I'd give the language inspired by the lovers to the cathedral, and the language inspired by the cathedral to the lovers. I told you that by executing this exchange, I'd be endeavoring to show the interconnectedness between the lovers and their environment. The language exchanged would mimic the exchange of body and soul between the lovers. It would create a sense of solidarity between the humans and their physical space. But it is more nuanced than that. By giving the cathedral words inspired by the lovers, I'm personifying the cathedral. And in giving the lovers words evoked by the cathedral, I am in essence cathedralizing the lovers. And what does that personification of place and placification of person achieve? We'll deal with the cathedral first. The cathedral, humanized, doesn't sit idly by. It actively participates in the scene. It mirrors the lovers' actions and emotions, doubling their effect. Personified, it becomes capable of memory of the events taking place in its keeping. If I give the cathedral the sense of sight, it can watch the scene as if it were a voyeur or a person keeping vigil over the lovers. If I give the building human movement, I can integrate it as a participant in the act. And, made mortal, the cathedral can give the reader this sense that everything that appears in stone, chapels, monuments, fortresses, dwellings, will return to dust. These things, reflection, memory, vigil, mortality, heighten the poignancy and mood around the love scene. Let's move to the lovers. If I cathedralize the lovers, turning them into stone, what am I saying about their love? that it's monumental, sacred, a place of worship, that it's subject to the elements, that it's timeless, yet also destined to be abandoned. This crossover between setting and image, place and human action doesn't just mimic the exchange of body and soul between the lovers. It enshrines them in ideas that needle the reader into the significance of the scene. But I need to do more than enshrine this love scene in notions of life and death if I want to augment its effect on the reader's heart. So I'm going to give the scene the context of memory. This is a context that reveals the scene to be physically over, an episode past, a love that is no longer. It brings nostalgia and perhaps melancholy into the mix. There are so many ways to create on-page love. I'm coming to the conclusion that the act of writing love is meant to emulate the act of love itself. If the author has a sense of playfulness with words and character lovers alike, the scene will spark with that playfulness. If the author writes with a sense of challenge by taking away the bed, by giving their pen restrictions, by putting their character lovers in dangerous places, they will feel that energy of risk, of varying degrees of romantic or sexual treachery, and charge their scenes with excitement. And what of language and punctuation? Because language itself is your lover's movement. Periods and commas, their breath. The repeated em dash, their increasing inability to speak. Sentence fragments are their ecstasy, the abrupt end of the passage their shudder and their gasp. The muse, as most accept a muse to be, is an exquisite source of inspiration, not to be diminished or underplayed. However, to pen this entity into their full potential in a character, the author has no choice but to give the muse the very best of the elements that go into writing a story. The princess needs her castle, so to speak, and that castle for the author is built of words, strategies, skills, and wisdom of the very highest order. Writing is emulation of love, a sense of play, a sense of challenge. Expert use of language and punctuation and many other methods are worth our exploration. But we'll save those for another day. Returning to the task at hand, a scene between two lovers. I could simply say, two people made love in an abandoned cathedral. Or I could do what I'm about to do now. I remember how the chapel waited. I see it still, waiting. It was pale and young, even though it had endured 400 winters and too many moons to count. The chapel stood there in the flesh, its archways keeping vigil for our silhouettes approaching, its figure cold as stone, its shoulders strong, its arms erect, its form extending like a body. It was alive, the chapel, or so it was for us. And you are sepia, statuesque and open to the elements. I hold you angled, you glimmer in my grip, arching back into the hallway's shadows as I lean like stone into your light. And we are vaulted, mossed in dust and stripped of velvet. The chapel watches, holds us with her moon-white hands. You pass my gaze as I receive your hallways dark and hallowed. You buttress me in every increment of every moment, and I am you and you are me until we are each other timeless. I feel you shift when I am silent. I lift my hand because you tower in thin air and wear the pallor of late April. After all these years, you're still my steeple in the distance longed for. I know you gave your hand in marriage to my brother in this chapel. Your face was veiled, but he was blinded, unaware that you and I have always been each other's altar. You are my cathedral, and though you're gone, your love is carved in stone, and I still worship there.